Ebanye kene mu no. No. Mana efa bu nkata umu ibe. My first thing is this. I am so delighted to see so many young people here today. Let us not forget that the reason why this whole thing started is because we wanted our young people to know that they have a heritage. We have a proud legacy. And because when I say young, maybe I'm looking at, say, 50, 45 and below, 42 and below. In the last 45 years, the way things have gone, some people have not known that we had days of glory. And many times you see people that are ashamed of their Igbo-ness. And yet we tell them, the giraffe can never become a monkey. What we are, we are. One equal temple of heroic hearts, made weak by time and faith, but strong in will, to seek, to strive, to find, and not to yield. Our topic today is Nkemjika, harnessing our human capital. When Patrick asked me for a topic, I suggested this topic. But I was hoping that Naga Atwalia, unfortunately for me, he went forward with it. So by the time I changed my mind of what I wanted to talk about, we already had accepted this. Ferdinand, ana si Nkemjika. Onye agatoro etwas actually Igbo. You are tempted to feel that it's a boast. Sometimes in discussing it, you are compelled to talk to your strength. And that is not the message you want to give Nigeria. Harnessing your human capital for what? Now, there are those that say that there is an urgent need to harness our human capital. In recent times, we have had threats. Anytime we're in anytime we're crisis, or maybe until Ufonya Sindi Igbo, Obnu Nemeronka, Wakolu Nibunu na, Onobria, pack and go. Even as late as last week, in Computer Village, they appointed a market head, and they told Igbos that if you think that electronics is not a commodity, move. Then, of course, when you had the quit notice, when we had our problems with our Arewa brothers, they said, all of Igbos, so and so day, leave northern Nigeria. So you see that Onworo Karoga, without having reason to think, at least in the non-ilo, they define a member. Isn't it time we began to go home? Even before then, and with this philosophy of Akuluno, Nanya make enough na bendozo, Olugomba gejedozibayin. So there is reason to ask, can we harness our intellectual, our human capital, our material capital, human capital and material resources to come and sort out our homeland? If we can do it, we need a proud Igbo land. We need it to be relevant in the scheme of things. We need it because that is where we are secure. So there is need to talk about harnessing our human capital. But let me give you an example, a lesson I learned about human capital many years ago. Do you know a country called Singapore? You don't go back to Singapore? Okay. I'll tell you about Singapore. In 2002, I was privileged to be in Singapore in a small delegation, IDC, Madise, and President Obasanjo was to come to Singapore, and they sent us as his advance party. So we went, and after discussing with the government officials, we met their prime minister. Very nice man. His name was Gu Chok Tong. Very interesting guy. And he asked a lot of questions about Nigeria. The one that embarrassed us, do you know when there was one Miss World contest in Nigeria? Then it was shifted from Abuja to Lagos. This man asked, why was it shifted? You wouldn't believe that the prime minister of a foreign country actually knows as much as, why did you shift the venue of a beauty contest? So at that stage, Chief Ojo Madokwe, who was the leader of our delegation, tried to change the topic. So just said, Mr. Prime Minister, Singapore is so developed. Housing, if you've been to Singapore, it is developed. Singapore is the only country that you're not allowed to chew chewing gum. Do you know why? Because chewing gum dirties the street. They don't sell chewing gum in Singapore, because it dirties the street. One of our brothers, Ambassador Chika Nibo, may his soul rest in peace, was ambassador at that time. There was a day we went out on a Saturday afternoon, driving around Singapore. You thought that we were there as tourists. I know dirty. We were driving around Singapore, Kamaka got food dirty. We couldn't see any. So that was how far they had gone. What else is remaining? Then the man gave a very interesting answer. I said, Minister, you know, for this type of things like, we have problems. Agalono, Agalumen Road, those kind of things. We have ministers like you that do it. And he didn't say it in an insolent way. But we have ministers. Ministers and people below them, they do this type of jobs in accordance with the values of competence, values of merit, and according to the systems we have set in place to ensure public good. So Joe asked, what's your job? He said, my own job? It's different. My job, now I want our young ones to listen, because tomorrow you shall lead. And that's why I want to tell you this story. He said, my job as a leader is to think ahead. 25 years ahead, 50 years ahead. I ask myself, what will the world be in 25 years' time? What are the forces that will shape it? What are the factors that will drive it? What must we do today for Singapore to be on top of that world when? Tomorrow. That is the job of the leader. A leader that cannot think ahead and ask, what will the world be tomorrow? And what do I do today to make sure that tomorrow we are where we should be, is not a leader. So he asked those questions so that Singapore, in his words, will survive and succeed. But we talk of Singapore. It's a country, it's a country, it's a country. Singapore is 1/5 the size of Lagos. Do you know that? Are you aware of that? Singapore is 1/5 the size of Lagos. I'm coming to this lecture, by the way. We're not telling the story. I'm just laying the background. Singapore is 1/3 in population of Lagos. Singapore has absolutely zero natural resources. When you want to build a house in Singapore, you import the sand. You know that? You import sand to build a house in Singapore. A country that imports sand, for goodness sake, what material do they have? Now, by 1964, Singapore and Nigeria were at par in terms of development. But because of that kind of leadership that is looking 25 years ahead, 50 years ahead, organizing their society, ensuring competence, ensuring merit, doing what they must do today for that tomorrow. Let me tell you, let me just compare Nigeria and Singapore for you for just a second. By the way, Singapore is smaller than Enugu State. But I don't want to embarrass you by comparing Singapore with Enugu. The only state in the southeast, Singapore is bigger than in population is Ebonyi. Singapore has 3% of our population. Singapore has 5% of our labor force. Singapore has 0.08% of our land mass. And yet, our nominal GDP today is 450 billion. And people with 3% of our population, 5% of our workforce, their GDP is 350 billion. 80% of our own. Their GDP per capita is $62,500. Our own is $2,250. That is the gap. In terms of what they call Human Development Index, quality of life, Singapore scores 0.932. Nigeria scores 0.532. Singapore ranks as the 9th most advanced country in the world. Nigeria ranks at 157 in the world. Now, there is a story, I didn't write this bit because I don't want to and I really wish it's not on record. During that visit, Enugu State Cultural Troupe was in Singapore because Nwanyi was ambassador. So the big deal was our cultural troupe came to Singapore. And we went to their Singapore Polytechnics where their students were learning, developing exploding diagrams. Is there any student of engineering here? Do you know what I call exploding diagram? You are? Okay. Now, these guys were developing the exploding diagram for the engine of a ship. They use it to teach their sailors what the engine of a ship is like. And it's the students that develop it. So they took me into their simulation room to see them develop these exploding diagrams. Then we came out on the quadrangle. And my wonderful brothers from Enugu were there wearing raffia and dancing traditional performance. And these Singaporeans were hanging by the windows, looking at them with a lot of interest. And I didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. Until today, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. And I've always asked myself, those two age mates, the boy that is doing the exploding diagram for me, and the boy from Enugu that is dancing at Chilogu, where are they now? One of them is earning $2,250 per annum. Another person is earning how much? It's 2,000. That is the difference. It begins and ends with human development. It begins and ends with human capital. The lesson we learn is 4. Number 1, nations that succeed today are those that have planned yesterday. And those that will succeed tomorrow are those that are planned when? Today. Number 2, something as basic as award of contract for road, for housing, should not concern a leader. Ada Aguifa has achievements. And I'll later tell you, today, Anna Luaka is a performer. He's a performing councillor. He's a performing chairman. Anna Agunye Road. Before this lecture is over, I will give you the achievement of a performer. And I will not count a road. These things don't count. But the most important thing is this. No matter Kejiaka. Okay? So, our topic today is this. Madu Kejiaka. Let us harness our human capital to succeed and survive. My brothers and sisters, the young ones here, you have 40, 50 years ahead of you. Tonight, I want you to ask yourself, do you have an idea of what Nigeria will look like 25 years from now? If you don't, I'll tell you a few things down the road. Are you prepared for 25 years from today? Are you thinking of 25 years from today? What is the action you are taking today? When I see our kids burning out time in drinking joints, taking bets on what doesn't concern them, breaking their heart that the weather in London is cold, I just know that they are not yet ready for 25 years' time. But this is not Singapore. This is Nigeria. So what is it we have to consider in Nigeria if we are planning for 25 years? The first is this. Singapore is an agile state. Nigeria is a fragile state. Did you hear me? One is agile. The other one is fragile. Now, I didn't invent these things. If you go to your Wikipedia, there are standard indicators of state fragility. A fragile state is different from a failed state. On the index of failing states, Nigeria ranks 14th. That is, there are only 13 countries that are probably more likely to collapse than ourselves. But like we say in Nigeria, it will not happen in Jesus, whatever I know. Now, a fragile state has low national cohesion. So when you think 25 years down the road, I want you to know what will change. Low national cohesion, widening insecurity, a fractionalized elite, national and subnational, persistent group grievances, uneven economic development, in some cases, decline, human flight, brain drain. The authority and legitimacy of state is questioned by insurgents and sometimes by militants. The public services are dysfunctional and inefficient. Human rights and rule of law is not guaranteed. It is often negated. Demographic pressures. Large populations are either refugees or internally displaced. But that's the world they're going to live in. So the next thing is this. Second fact is this. Do you know what is called DAWN? D-A-W-N initiative? Development Agenda of Western Nigeria. It is a properly established organization where our brothers in the Southwest are saying, listen, before the shit hits the fan, let's come together and do something about our future. You know about Pandev? You know about Arewa Research Group? So, Adasio Chinti. Naginimel. No, say so. All right. So, we are talking about our human capital. What is our human capital? Kedifa Ejibulu Mado. Kedifa Ejibulu Igbo. It is the totality of our traits, what we know, our talents, our skills, our ability, our experience, our intelligence, our training, our judgment, our wisdom, possessed individually or collectively. That's our human capital. There are other forms of capital. I'm including what you call symbolic capital. When we talk of symbolic capital, the older ones will remember something like 1979, when Nanyukuzi put an Ogaze election. And when this Simba may win, okay? But the whole Igbo nation followed him. He knew he would not win. But he wanted to give his people a place to stand. And they followed him because they wanted a place to bargain. He was simply a symbol. When he came back, contested the election in Abga for presidency, did you seriously think he thought he was going to win? You see that stupid? But he wanted to give his people a place to stand. Archimedes says, give me a place to stand and deliver long enough and I'll move the world. That's why Abga, Anasin Anambra, Nkabunke, Thank you. Or somebody made it possible. Even this year, women is your business. But as a father, he left you with something. These are what you call symbolic capital. You have cultural capital. The power of your culture, your values. Those things, agasi and carbon there. Sometimes we see it in music. We see it in the arts. We see it in all forms of life. But we have it. Anya baraka, chukabora anyaka. So we may not have resources, but we have human, because we have culture, we have symbols, we have human capacity, we have knowledge, we have skills, we have abilities, we can still remember, if I have a center of memories, we have experiences. Even if we had absolutely nothing, we still don't have a reason to fail. So I'm asking this generation, why are we not succeeding? And are you prepared to succeed? Because I'll tell you something, it was not always like this. It was not always like this. There was a time, I told my son a few days ago, and I said, my generation did that, and he said to me, look, if you guys were so smart, why is Nigeria so bad? But actually, there was a time that Igbos knew success. There was a time that we harnessed our capital. You can think of at least 3 or 4 distinctive times in our history. In the 30s, when our people took on to Christianity, when they took on to Western education, every community got into community schools. If I na kwalo obodo, ana tuko ego onu, anezipu mako obodo boka fa gwa akwụkwọ. Nobody asked onye, onobria. Everybody got into it. Achabe said that in a generation, we almost made up the gap between us and our Yoruba brothers. The first secondary school in Yoruba land was around 1850. The first primary school was 1832, and I think the first secondary school around 1860 something. Our own was in the in the last century. We almost made up. We threw ourselves into it. Then came the railway lines. We found out across Nigeria, for commerce, Kafanchan, Benin Kebi, you name it. Igbos were everywhere. And everywhere they came, the first thing they did was they formed a town union or a town association. Then in 1948, all of them came together and formed the Igbo Union at a convention in Port Harcourt. It became the first pan-Igbo organization in an attempt to create an Igbo identity. Because 100 years before that, the man from Ibonyi, it was the work of colonial ethnographers. We were a nation without a country. Unlike some people that say we have a country without a nation, we were a nation without a country. So that is why it's important. No matter what happens, don't destroy those things that hold you together. Because our identity is still work in progress. Then, Igbo Union teamed up with NCNC that was led by a very charismatic Igbo person called Azikiwe, amongst other reasons. And then NCNC came to power in the eastern region. In that eastern region, between 1956, 55, and 1967, there was a group called Eastern Nigerian Development Corporation. Now, I'm coming back to when we were like Singapore. This Singapore story, we could have been like Singapore. There was a time that we were at par with Singapore. There was a time that our economy was developing faster than Singapore. It meant that our human capacity was brought together. We had the leadership, we had the vision, we had the vehicle to move like Singapore. The vehicle we had was the Eastern Nigeria Development Corporation. Now, does ENDC? Does anybody know about it? Any of the younger ones? Weniaka? No, guy, you should know. Does any of our young ones know about ENDC? All right. There was a group called ENDC. Let me tell you what happened. The government of Eastern Region gave them full autonomy, independence. Anything concerning development, go and do it. And that's a contract. There was no attempt to corner it to my brother, to my sister. And look at what they did. When I called the name Count, they did it in 12 years. About textile mill, 1. Niger Semen Kalagu, Glass Company Port Harcourt, Cross River Mills, Cooperative Bank of Eastern Nigeria, Boti Adopobo, Obudukatu Ranch, ENDC filling stations, Kettling rest houses, Presidential Enugu, Presidential Port Harcourt, Livestock Project Kupon, Eastern Nigeria Medical Center, real estate here in Enugu, Niger Steel MNN, African Continental Bank, Odagwa Robert Industries, Afam Power Plant, Oji Power Plant, Abam Elele Power Plant, Oil Palm Estate Eket, Cocoa Estate, Odubra Estate, Industrial Cluster Enugu. Should I continue? Okay. That was what we did. We're not always like this. Did I count a road? Did I count Niger Bridge? Did I count University of Nigeria? But those things are there. These are what our fathers did. Always remember it. You have a proud and ancient heritage. Don't let anybody tell you that a giraffe is a monkey. It can't happen. You are born tall, walk tall. But unfortunately, there came the war. There was state creation. So this thing was scattered between the states of the region. And ENDC died. So if you want to know where we parted ways with Singapore, it was when ENDC died. And if you want to join road again with Singapore, you have to find something like ENDC. So that we don't have our children running around looking for jobs. So the war ended. And there was a protracted period of what you may call neglect. This thing we now call marginalization is not a baptismal name, it's a confirmation name. What it was called in those days was the politics of federal neglect. It was later, as we learned more grammar, it was enough also marginalization. And when it looked like it would work, they claim marginalized, or lose your meaning. But let me tell you what it did. It denied us one voice. Because we did not know how to respond to it. Somebody told me, Ferdinand, don't go and read from the book of Lamentations. We are now in the book of Revelation. So I'm going to end this chapter on lamentation by telling you why there was a marginalization. And I don't want to blame this government or any government, so I'm going to give you figures that are old. What has changed? 8 years ago, Aki Kenga, one of the Igbo think tanks, did a study. There is a group called PPAC, Presidential Policy Advisory Committee, that studied 12,000 federal government projects and reported on their status. Out of the total number of those projects, the percentage cited in the Southeast was 2.1%. Did you hear me? 2.1%. The money voted for roads, the percentage passing the Southeast was 1.1%. For electrical works and power projects, 1.0%. For dams, boreholes, 8.6%. For agri projects and allied projects, 2.8%. Educational institution projects, 1.6%. Headquarters of federal government establishment, 6.6%. Non-ministerial establishments, 1.4%. That is the War Museum in Umuahia and the River Basin Authority in Owerri. Commercial ventures, 2.2%. That was the coal corporation, moribund and now gone. Research institutes, 10.7%. Local governments, we had 96 out of 774. States, we had 5 out of 36. Now, this is the reality. So you hear stories that you are not united. It was how do you respond to this crisis that led to a cacophony of voices, a babel of voices in our home. And when this in say shame. Shame. But for a while, that was the story here. In any case, two opinions emerged in Igbo land. There are those that say this thing is rigged, we don't want it. Give us Biafra or nothing. A lot of our youngsters say so. Some of us don't agree. We say no. Let us stay here in Nigeria, join hands with others, and try to build an equitable society. So there are two groups. Now, within the second group, there are two more groups. There are those that say, restructure Nigeria. If you restructure Nigeria, we shall become a group unto ourselves. We can take care of our own matter. We can take our fate into our hands. And for them, there is a document called the Kweme Declaration that we went and did in Oka. And for some people, it is so passionate about it that anything we can do to push forward restructuring, they say, do it. My brother Joe was here last week, and I don't want to talk about it. I think Joe doesn't understand some of the things that happen in our politics. But so be it. There's another group that says, listen, we don't know what this restructuring is. We don't agree with it. It will take time. It's difficult to achieve. Why don't we just work within the existing framework and look for the presidency, and look for the vice presidency, and look for whatever? Another group says, listen, whether you're chasing restructuring or now you're not chasing restructuring, don't be outside the room that decisions are being made. By the way, I'm not saying that anybody is wrong. All of those things are valid positions. But I'm trying to explain to you why we seem not to agree on the way forward. But whatever it is, let us agree on some common goods. If we get those common goods, wherever you are, pursue them. And so I say, for the Igbo nation to survive and succeed, we need a coordinated effort to channel our human capital and our resources toward building a socially cohesive homeland, value-centered, economically prosperous, and politically stable. The cornerstone of such a homeland is regional economic integration. For the simple reason that we have 5 states. So whether you are talking restructure or not restructure, at least regional economic integration. Now, because of the way those states were created, with Ndami, Nachifa, the state governments never came together to say, let us pursue it. It has been the job of NGOs, socio-political organizations, even individuals, to keep on saying, we need this, work on it, work on it, work on it. Ohaneze set up 7 committees. The first one is regional economic integration. You need it. The next is good governance. Without good governance, even the Singapore man that spends his night looking into the future, like a fortune teller, he said that his ministers and subordinates act in conformity with due process. Then we need domestic and international networking. We are dispersed around the world. That is our strength. We must bring our people together. Then we need to develop human and social capital. We set up a committee on restructuring and self-determination. They are the ones that told us we don't have to break our head about it. And then, of course, a committee on legal matters and fundraising. The most important thing is this. This is just proposals. But the most important of that is regional integration. But let me not give the impression, no, Haneze Buzo will be different. Before then, there was yet another effort to form what was called Southeast Economic Commission. Are you following my logic? There has to be a vehicle. I will land soon, but I want to build a logic. We have done it before. I've established that. We have challenges. I've established that. We can do it again. I'm arguing that. How do we do it? We need a vehicle. For some reason in the past, governments could not do it. Of late, Ohaneze is talking about it. Before then, individuals, so, there was a forum on industrial clusters held in Enugu in 2006. And they said that despite the high human capital we have, you guys can work in factories anywhere. But there's no factory for you to work here at home. What is the purpose of having high-skilled human beings that can work in any factory when there's no factory here for them to work in? So they said that there was poor industrial development in the Southeast because of lack of coordinated institutional and infrastructural development planning. Between 2007 and 2015, a group called African Institute for Applied Economics. Then there was an interim committee, steering committee, headed by a gentleman called Engineer Sir Chris Okoye. Do you know him? Have you heard about him? Sir, please, can you just stand up, sir? Please. This gentleman coordinated a group that did extensive discussion, studies, consultations, and activities. And then they eventually recommended a Southeastern Nigeria Development Commission. The other one was called Eastern Nigeria Development Commission. Do you see similarity in name and objective? But one came from government, one came from a think tank. They also recommended a lot of things, including a fund, private sector driven, with government having equity. In any case, for 1 or 2 or 3 other reasons, it has not seen the light of day. Mana achom kunu bul nobi na ndi Igbo nwere mmadu. Makono mmadu ka eji aka? They did all that thing free of charge. Working for 11 years. No pay. They're not the only ones. There's another group called Southeast Regional Economic Development Company, headed by Professor Batin Naji. You know him. Pursuing almost the same objectives. They want investments in infrastructure, power, agriculture, project finance, healthcare, industries, and security in the Southeast. Then there was one that was equally ambitious. South-South, Southeast professionals. Have you heard about it? Now this one is South-South, Southeast. They went as far as doing a development agenda 20-year. The Singaporeans are doing 25, they did 20-year developmental agenda. They held summits in Asaba, summits in Port Harcourt, sensitization sessions in Umuahia, Enugu, Oka. The man that was their chairman is here. Please receive and say hello to Chief Emeku Goju, Emeka Kuloto. Tomorrow, when people tell you that Igbos are not united, that Igbos are selfish or self-centered, tell them, foul. I hope you're not bringing that to me. No, no, please don't. Because I have a story. We shall get to the end of this story soon, but there has to be a sequence. I don't want to tell you a story and leave, because I want you to do something at the end of this story. But the good thing is this. Of late, the Southeastern Governors Forum have formed a very strong secretariat that is now receiving this type of proposals. So why do I tell you this? There is a written work, it will go out later. I'm just trying to round up. Without pressure, without interest, without action from below, nothing will be done. So I want you to know. Look at where we are. Don't fold your hands and say you are young and can do nothing. There is something for everybody to do. These guys have done their own. You must now do your own. So if we have a vision and we have a plan, the next thing we need is a strategy. Quite simple. Government will do for us that we cannot do for ourselves. Agreed? That is the purpose of government. Don't blame everything on government. The only thing you must ask government to do for you is that you cannot do for yourself. Security, infrastructure, public good, that one they must do. But there are some we can do for ourselves. The community must do some for itself. Look at this gathering. I don't know how many we are. 1 year, we are here by our own. This is not the rally where you say mobilization. My brother there, Tungu, is a former local government chairman and a friend from the 70s. If they are told, bring 10 buses, and then for mobilization for 10 buses of people, you are doing your own. And you are going to do even more. Because many are called, but few are chosen. There is something for us to do as a community. There is something for us to do as individuals. As individuals, we must seek excellence. Excellence. You must train and retrain. We must not accept mediocrity. We must not lie down and be rolled over by problems. We must go the extra mile. There are character traits of people that succeed. And it is people that succeed that make successful nations. So there is something for government to do. There is something for the community to do. There is something for us to do. Now, I want to begin rounding up. I'm assuming, by God's grace, that with this new interest from our government, we shall have a framework to pursue development so that as our fathers did it, it can happen in our own lifetime so that you can have life plenty and abundant. But there are 3 issues I want to talk about before I round up. Silent threats. Silent threats. Have you heard of desertification in northern Nigeria? Have you? Does it concern us? Obosaline? Let me tell you how. The desert is encroaching the southern part of the country at a rate of 0.6 kilometers per annum. Every year, we lose 350,000 hectares of arable land, about 3,500 square kilometers of land, about the size of Lagos is lost every year. And when nothing is done about it, in 25 years, we shall lose 87,500 square kilometers of land. That is the equivalent of 2.5 times the size of the Southeast. It has implications for food security. But most of all, it has implications in terms of human displacement. Today, in all our farmlands, and when they never when Amanda, yes. In 25 years' time, they are going to become their own settlement. Have you thought about that? Odokavanana, they are going nowhere. So you must open up your mind that the desert that is shrinking in the north is creating a new neighbor for you at home. A new neighbor. Brothers and sisters, learn to love your neighbors because you got new ones. Winston Churchill wrote an article about the French colonies some years ago. And he joked that the only thing they had that was worthwhile was Lake Chad. And even that, he said, was shrinking. In 1963, Lake Chad had an area of 225,000 square kilometers. It is the equivalent of everybody in this room crowding into this platform. Lake Chad has shrunk from the size of this room to the size of this platform. And because of that, 2.8 million people are displaced. 9.6 million people are living on handouts and charity. And worst of all, there is a group called Boko. When nations refuse to think ahead, this is what happens. I'll give you something else to think ahead about. Population. Population and youth bulge. Today, Nigeria is about 200 million people. By 2030, it is expected to be 236 million. By 2050, it's expected to be 410 million. Now, my brother Ugo is into housing. We have a housing deficit of maybe 20,000 units, 20 million units. When our population has so doubled within the next 32 years, you can only imagine what it's going to be. The pressure we're going to have on transportation, on food security, on education, on healthcare, on quality of life. And 30 years from now, I pray God that all of you will be here. But most of all, what is the implication for our youths? Because they are going to have the biggest problem. No jobs. And yet our youth are our biggest resources. And that's why I say, as a matter of urgency, we have to look at our educational system. We must stop teaching people to pass exams and begin teaching them to make a living. Every person must have a skill. I hear some people run around and say that we are Jews. We are not Jews, but we can learn from them. Every Jewish child is taught a skill. Without skills, we are going to be in trouble. Now, I'm not talking about the outliers. I'm talking about what we, ordinary people, can do. There are great achievers in our community. Kids winning prizes. I know about them. I know what they're doing in Nollywood. I'm not talking about what we, the ordinary people, can do. Finally, we think about a Nigeria without oil. Whether we like it or not, this petroleum resources is going to finish. Now, some people say, well, let us see what the oil producing states will do. I say, what are you going to do when your own states are dependent on allocation? Is there any state in the Southeast that can finance itself as of today? No. That is why it is urgent we do something. Not because of we must have options. So please, those of you, we must think about the future because our children are involved. Now, one thing is important. As we say, think home, think home, think home. The people at home must create the enablement for people to come home. There's no point of saying think home if home is hostile. The people at home must create the enablement for people to come home. There is a wonderful thing I see happening in Enugu. Enugu is about the only seriously planned town in the southeast. You go to Okpara Square and you see people exercising, taking an interest in their fitness. You see a community on the move. You see a sense of humanity. Nobody planned it. It arose. It gives us character. We need more and more of that across the whole place. So in conclusion, what we need is to survive and to succeed. We have done it before. We have challenges today, but we can do it again. We are a people of faith. Matthew 20, chapter 22, verse 32 says, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. But Jesus said, he is not the God of the dead, but the living. Isn't it contradictory? No, it's not. He is the God of our fathers. If we do like them, he will bless us like them. Our fathers built greatly. Our father did wonderfully. I am a mekafa. Fanasi Ujiofoga na Omife Jidofo. Keep your hands clean. This was the life of our fathers. I am a mekafa. They say we don't have leaders. In Cuba, during the revolution, there was a man called Ernesto Che Guevara, a right-hand man of Castro. Every day in Cuba, school children say, I want to be like Che. I want to be like Che. They don't say, I want to be like Castro, I want to be like Che. Che was an Argentine. Left Argentina as a medical doctor, fought in Cuba, became the governor of Central Bank, became the minister of industries, went and fought in Congo, and then died in Bolivia. He's such a charismatic, heroic figure. They say, I want to be like Che. When we were young, I talk I saw a Zik. Now go home and ask yourselves, who do you want to be like today? Who do you want to be like today? But I'll tell you something. There are a few people I want to be like. I want to be like Ben Etiaba. Because he made a difference. I want to be like Nana and Mude. We may read about Che Guevara. We may know about Zik. But there are people here that we can be like. People that are selfless. People that can pour out all they have for others. People that are serving. I want us to be like our fathers. I want us to be like our mothers. I want us to be like those people that raised us with honor, with integrity, and dignity. I want to be like people like Jude that have sustained the work of others. This is what we want to be like. So we can have interactive value creation. We can change all those things. Never feel powerless. Robert F. Kennedy said, and I want to end with this quotation. He said, few will have the greatness to bend history itself. But each of us can work to change a small portion of events. It is from the numberless, diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. Each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. crossing each other from a million different centers of energy, and daring those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Like I said, we are of faith. I believe in what each and every person here can do. Because you sacrifice to be here. You sacrifice to listen. You are the people that will make it happen. But don't just do it by yourself. Do something else. Matthew 28:19. Christ said, therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. Aga kalaka adeli ngulo. Okuno aga kalaka adeli ngulo. Dalum.